So I need your favorite DFS plays in the following salary price ranges. Let's start with a pitcher north of $8,000. Matty, who you got?
There's a lot of good choices at the high end of the salary range tonight, and I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to find a unique option. So we have Robbie Ray, who's just been a machine lately, Freddie Peralta, who's in a good spot against the Cardinals, Nestor Cortez, who's coming off a double-digit strikeout game against the Orioles. I think with all those guys there, the one that goes overlooked is Sean Manaea, who's at home against the Mariners, and his last time out, he wasn't very good, but the prior two starts, he actually put up 60 total DraftKings points. And I like the matchup, and Manaea probably is in the same tier of pitchers as guys like Peralta. He's definitely better than Cortez. Maybe he's not as good as Robbie Ray, but I do think Manaea is generally underrated. The matchup's good. The park is good in Oakland. He has home field advantage. So because I think he's more contrarian to a significant extent than these other three options, I think he's my favorite play of the group.
All right, 7 pitchers that'll cost you more than $8,000. Erik, who are you going with?
Yeah, I like a decent number of those guys. Manaea is a good choice. Nestor Cortez is a good choice, but I think I'm just going to pay up for Robbie Ray. At over $10,000 is not too expensive for him. Everything he's done seems real to me. Maybe not quite a 2.64 ERA. Most of the ERA estimators have him in the low threes, but all his peripherals are outstanding. 33.1% strikeout rate is a career high. Combining it with a 6.3% walk rate, which is a career low, and also it's barely more than a third of what he had last year when he had that awful season. He's also gotten his ground ball rate up to 37.5%, his best since 2017. Still a low number in theory. Some potential for homer issues there could knock that ERA up a bit. But the strikeouts are so real, and they've been even more real lately. In his last 6 games, he has 5 double-digit strikeout games, striking out over 43% of opposing batters in that stretch. And in 2 of those 6 starts, he struck out half the batters he faced, including his last time out, which did come against the Rays. Ordinarily, facing the same team twice in a row does give a benefit to the offense, but you could knock a full 20 percentage points off his strikeout rate from his last start, and it would still be north of 30%. So I think he can fall a lot and still be easily the top option on this slate.
All right, well, let's save the people some cash there on the hill. A pitcher under $8,000. Erik?
Yeah, there's a guy I like who's well under $8,000, and that's Ranger Suarez at $6,500. He's got a tough home park in Philadelphia that he'll be pitching in tonight, but he'll get to do that against an Orioles team, which is 23rd by WRC Plus on the season. So a fine situation overall, I'd say. He's not as good as his 150 ERA, but a FIP of just under 3 and XFIP of about 3.5. That's quite a good starter for a guy who's cost just $6,500. Obviously, he hasn't spent most of the year as a starter. He was a reliever for the first several months. And his first couple starts were somewhat shaky, but he's been really on fire lately. His last 5 starts, a 1.55 ERA, got that strikeout rate up to 28.2% while walking just 6% of opposing batters. All the peripherals here are excellent. Even has a great ground ball rate for the season, over 60%, which helps him in that homer-friendly park in Philadelphia. So I think he's a guy who's really shown quite a lot, and he's got a pretty great matchup here, even with that tough park.
All right, what do you got, Matty?
So Suarez is the guy. For tournaments, I worry about his ownership, but the matchup is so good and his price just really doesn't make a lot of sense. The Orioles lineup also is likely to not be a very strong one because with the game being in a National League park, you probably don't get both Ryan Mountcastle and Trey Mancini in the lineup unless they do something quirky and play one of them at third base or left field or something like that. So it'll be worth keeping an eye on the Orioles lineup. I think that Suarez is just fine, assuming that you can play a GPP lineup where you get your leverage elsewhere. Maybe you don't play the chalk pay up option at pitcher, or if you do with Suarez, you play a super contrarian stack. So the real concern is just ownership, but I think Suarez is the best play. If you do want to pivot, though, John Means, other side of the game, I think also has some upside. The Phillies are a good offense, but again, JT Realmuto, who I've mentioned a few times recently, isn't playing catcher for them right now. So with him at first base, Rhys Hoskins on the IL, they're now playing 2 catchers, which really negates the value of Realmuto. It's not a very strong lineup. And if Means gets the win, it means Suarez doesn't. So with Suarez at 60% ownership, probably something like that, Means probably 6%. There's a lot of leverage to be had with that win bonus, and I think Means could do well. So if you want to pivot, John Means is probably the best guy there.
All right, how about a hitter over 5K? Dudes who can swing a good wood. Matt.
So I think Nelson Cruz is a good option for this slate. And it's not that I think Robbie Ray has a bad game. It's that I think outside of Suarez, Ray will be the highest owned player of the whole night. And we know what Ray looks like when he has a bad game, even if it doesn't happen that much recently. Like when Ray's bad, he can be really bad and balls are flying out of the park, because the one thing that Robbie Ray isn't good at is limiting hard contact. When he gets hit around, there will be points going up on the other side, even if it's a very infrequent thing. Erik mentioned that the Rays just faced him, and I do think that matters. I mean, even though they didn't do well against him, that was also a game where Nelson Cruz didn't play. So assuming he's in the lineup, assuming a bunch of righties are in the lineup, I think that they're a very stackable team on a slate where it's going to be hard to find a contrarian offense. You have the Yankees, you have the Braves, the Astros, I think all very popular teams. It's going to be difficult to find one that isn't the chalk. And I think the Rays, with the leverage also against Robbie Ray, make a lot of sense there.
Who is your hitter over 5K, Erik?
Yeah, I like Jordan Alvarez at 5,100. He's been crushing the ball all year. Hard hit rate 54.7% is seventh best among qualified hitters. And he makes a fair amount of contact too. Not a low strikeout guy, but he's basically at league average there. He's also seeing the ball incredibly well over his last 10 games, 10 walks against just 6 strikeouts, 3 homers, 8 runs, 8 RBI over that stretch. So he's a young hitter who we know can be excellent and is excellent right now, and he'll get the platoon advantage against Jaime Barria, who is not excellent. 4.93 ERA seems well-deserved. League average control and ability to keep the ball on the ground, but he does not miss bats at all, just a 13.8% strikeout rate. And when you're giving up a ton of contact to guys who hit it as hard as Alvarez does, I think that's going to be a big day for Alvarez and potentially many other Astros here.
Matt, who is the best value bat on this slate?
So the best values are probably coming from teams like the Braves, Astros. Even at 5,100, I agree. Like Alvarez is still a value there. Yankees are underpriced. But I think my favorite value team to play is the Orioles, because Ranger Suarez is likely to be well above 50% in most tournaments. In some of the smaller field stuff, he could be 70 or 80% on, just because that price is so ridiculous. And the Orioles are actually in a decent spot. Like Suarez is probably decent, but not a great pitcher. It is a good park. And if Suarez is bad, it's going to mean that some Orioles are good. So Austin Hayes, 3,200. Anthony Santander, same price. Trey Mancini's pretty cheap if he cracks the lineup. I like all of them. And I think with the way that the slate sets up, you have outfielders in Houston are going to be the chalk, and then outfielders on the Yankees, same thing. And no one's playing Orioles outfielders because they're going to be playing the pitcher on the other side of the game. So I think they are value plays, but most of the value comes from the leverage against the opposing pitcher.
Okay, Erik, you agree there, and then who's your value bat?
Well, I said I was going with Ranger Suarez, so I'm probably not playing those Orioles bats, but I do see it as the potential situation, especially given that park, as something you could do to go against the grain there. So I think that logic does make sense. My top value play is Eddie Rosario down at 2,500. A bit of recency bias here in that he just hit for the cycle against the Giants on Sunday. But even without that, at 2,500, that's quite cheap for a guy who's been, not a great hitter, but an above average one for several years now. He was not that early in the year with Cleveland, but since his trade to Atlanta, since coming off the injured list, he's been excellent. 320 with 5 homers and just 56 trips to the plate. He's also barreling the ball 13.3% of the time after doing that, just 4.6% of his plate appearances in Cleveland. And he's striking out way less, 10.7% strikeout rate, down from 18.5% for his career. So he's normally a low strikeout guy. Currently, he's a very low strikeout guy. He'll get the platoon advantage against Humberto Mejia, who only has 5 career starts and an ERA north of 5 in those starts. Just kind of below average all around and particularly bad at keeping the ball on the ground. Also has an ERA north of 5 in the minors this season. So pretty great situation for a guy who's been quite hot lately. And even, if he wasn't, he's not really a $2,500 level player. I think he'd, under normal circumstances, be somewhere in the mid 3s at least.
All right, dudes. Y'all know how we like to wrap up these segments. Slate approved pick time, your favorite play overall on tonight's Major League Baseball slate. Matt.
I'm having a hard time narrowing this down because there are some spots, like there's a few of them I really like. The Orioles, like I mentioned, I think the Diamondbacks as a stack against Huascar and Noah are just not going to get any attention whatsoever. If I have to pick one, though, I think it's Vlad Guerrero Jr. I didn't mention him as my favorite pay-up option, but Shane Baz is making his MLB debut for the Rays, and the Blue Jays on the other side, I mean, maybe they just strike out a bunch against him. He is a really good prospect, but it's also his MLB debut, and this could go a lot of directions. And Vlad obviously is a great hitter, but because he costs $5,900 and there's a bunch of way cheaper first basemen, I think his ownership stays like 5% at most. It could even be well lower than that at 1 or 2%. So assuming Vlad is contrarian, which I think he will be just based on the price tag and the existence of expensive pitchers that are going to make it hard to afford him, I think Vlad and all the Blue Jays could end up being my favorite stack.
Erik, what direction are you going to go in for your slate approved pick?
Well, Matt just mentioned my guy, but not necessarily in a positive light, and that's Shane Baz. I didn't pick him as my top pitcher under 8,000 because I think he's quite a big risk. I think Ranger Suarez is most likely to be the highest producing player in that range. But if you want to get some upside for cheap, Baz at just 6,900. He's a great pitching prospect. He touches triple digits. And he's been dominating the minors this season. 2.06 ERA, strikeout rate of 37.9% against just a 4.6% walk rate over 17 starts. This is what elite pitching prospects do in the upper minors, and these are the kind of guys who come up and have success right away. You might be worried about workload for the Rays, and we don't know exactly how long they intend for him to throw, but he did throw 5, 5, and 6 innings in his last 3 starts in the minors, so he's certainly stretched out to go long enough to get a win. The reason why I would say that Suarez is much more likely to have a good game is because Baz is facing a very tough matchup against the Jays and against Robbie Ray on the other side, making it tough to get a win. So there's quite a lot of downside here, but that's about as much talent as you're going to get for a pitcher this cheap. So as a flyer, I think he's a guy who's worth taking a shot on.